My name is Imara Osei-Banks. I'm 30 years old, and the evening my mother pulled me aside at my own birthday party and said, quietly, in the hallway outside the kitchen, while the rest of my family sat at the table 20 feet away, "We're worried about you. Normal people don't do this," was the evening I finally understood that the people who love you most can hold the smallest picture of who you are. My brother said it louder, across the table, 10 minutes later, when the conversation moved from private to public in the way that family conversations do when no one has thought to close a door. It's a little embarrassing, honestly. He said it the way he said most things, directly, without calculation, with the specific confidence of someone who has never had reason to believe that his assessment of a situation might be missing something. My father stared at the ceiling. My aunt on my mother's side looked at her plate. My grandmother turned her water glass a quarter inch to the left and said nothing, which was her version of the loudest thing in the room. I looked at my brother. I looked at my mother, who had come back to the table and was now rearranging the serving dishes with a focused attention that suggested she had said her piece and was finished. I picked up my own cake plate, carried it to the kitchen, rinsed it, set it in the rack. I went back to the table. I thanked everyone for coming. I walked them to their cars. I drove home. What none of them knew, what I had told no one, not my mother, not my closest friend, not the colleague at the university library where I worked 3 days a week who had watched me eat lunch alone at my desk for 2 years while I revised the same 3 chapters, was that 6 weeks earlier a literary agent named Carolyn Marsh had sent me an email that began, "I finished the manuscript last night, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." The offer of representation was already in my inbox. I had not yet responded. I want to give you the full picture, because the birthday party doesn't make sense without the 3 years that preceded it, and the 3 years don't make sense without what I was trying to build inside them. I grew up in Ashford, a mid-sized city in the Mid-Atlantic region, the second of 3 children in a family that had specific ideas about what effort was for. My father, Edmund Osei-Banks, was a structural engineer who had emigrated from Ghana at 23 with a graduate degree and a discipline for precision that had not softened in the 30-plus years since. He was not a man who distrusted creativity. He was a man who had learned, through specific experience, that creativity without a structural application was indistinguishable from wishful thinking, and that the cost of wishful thinking was paid in real currency at a real exchange rate. He had built a life on the other side of that lesson, and he was not inclined to watch his daughter ignore it. My mother, Vivian, was a registered nurse who had worked acute care for 22 years and whose understanding of what human beings required to survive had been formed in rooms where the difference between adequate and not adequate had immediate, visible consequences. She was a practical woman in the way that people become practical when the impractical has shown them its full range of outcomes. She loved me with the specific intensity of a person who has spent 2 decades watching what happens when things go wrong, and her love expressed itself primarily as the desire to prevent, in advance, every preventable failure. She was not wrong that writing a novel was a risk. She was not wrong that most novels don't find publishers. She was working from accurate statistics applied to an incomplete picture. My brother Desmond was 4 years older than me, a project manager at a construction firm, and the family member who had arrived earliest and most completely at the operating mode my parents had modeled. He was organized, decisive, and had a specific impatience with what he called side projects, activities that produced no legible output on a timeline he could track. He was not unkind. He genuinely believed, I think, that naming the problem clearly was a form of help. He had said similar things to our younger sister about her graphic design work before she had landed a full-time position at a branding agency, after which he had updated his assessment and never mentioned the prior one. He was not a person who revised in public. He was a person who updated his model silently and moved on. The novel had begun in the 3rd year of my position at the Ashford University Library, where I worked as a research librarian, cataloging, reference support, a graduate seminar on archival research methods that I co-taught once a year with a faculty member in the history department. The position was stable, and the work was genuinely interesting to me, and it paid $52,000 a year, which covered my 1-bedroom apartment in the east part of the city, my student loan payments, and not much else. I had no complaints about the work. I had a growing, specific awareness that there was something I had not yet done that I was going to have to do, eventually, or spend the rest of my professional life knowing I had not. The thing was a novel. I had been circling it since graduate school, where I had done a master's in library science and written in the margins of that program 3 short stories that had been published in 2 small literary journals and 1 mid-tier one, and that had been read in total by approximately 400 people, which was enough to tell me that the thing I was building when I wrote fiction was real, and not enough to tell me whether it would scale. I began the novel in February of my 27th year. I wrote in the mornings before the library from 5:30 to 7:15 in the kitchen of my apartment with the overhead light off and the small lamp on the counter on, because the overhead light produced a quality of attention that was wrong for the work and the lamp produced a quality that was right, and I had learned by then that the conditions under which good work happens are not arbitrary. I wrote on weekdays. I did not write on weekends, because I had read enough about the neuroscience of sustained creative production to understand that uninterrupted rest was not the enemy of the work but a component of it, and because I was 30 years old with a full-time job and I did not have the romance about suffering that I might have had at 23. The novel was about a woman who catalogs the estate library of a recently deceased historian and discovers, in the process of the work, that the historian's published account of a significant regional event is built on a suppressed archive, documents he had access to, read, and deliberately excluded. It was a book about institutional memory and selective record, about what gets kept and what gets discarded and who decides, and about what a person does when the evidence in front of them contradicts the official version of a story that other people have organized their lives around. I am describing it this way because I think you deserve to know what it actually was, not just that it existed. I finished the first draft in 14 months. I revised for 9 more. I had a manuscript of 94,000 words that I had read so many times I could no longer tell what it was, which is the specific condition that signals you are ready to send it to someone else. I sent it to 11 literary agents, using a query process I had researched with the same methodical attention I brought to the archival research seminars I taught. I had read 3 books on querying, 2 industry blogs maintained by working agents, and the submission guidelines of every agency I queried. I sent 11 queries on a Thursday morning and went to work and thought about it as little as possible, which was not very little. 4 of the 11 requested the full manuscript. One of those 4 was Carolyn Marsh. The birthday party was on a Saturday in October of my 30th year. Carolyn's email had arrived 6 weeks before that, on a Wednesday morning, which I had read on my phone in the library parking lot before my shift, and then read again 3 more times over the course of the day, at intervals, the way you return to something to confirm that it says what you thought it said. She had been reading the manuscript for 3 weeks. She described specific scenes. She asked one question about the ending, not a revision suggestion, a genuine question, the kind that tells you the reader has been sitting with the book rather than moving through it. She said she would like to schedule a call. We had the call the following Monday. Carolyn Marsh had been a literary agent for 19 years and had a list that included 3 debut novelists who had gone on to significant critical attention and 2 mid-career writers whose work I had read and admired without knowing anything about their representation. She was direct and specific and did not say anything she did not mean, which I assessed within the first 10 minutes of the call and which I found clarifying. She said she wanted to represent the book. She said she thought it would be a difficult submission. The category was competitive, the themes were not commercial in the easiest sense, and debut literary fiction required a specific kind of editorial champion to land well. She said she was not promising an outcome, only a committed effort on behalf of a manuscript she believed in. She said it in those words. I said I would think about it and be back to her within the week. I ended the call. I went back to the library. I worked my afternoon shift. I checked out books and answered 3 reference questions and pulled a box of archival materials for a graduate student working on a thesis about regional labor history, and I thought about Carolyn Marsh's call in the background of all of it, the way you think about something you are not ready to say out loud yet. I had not signed with her by the birthday party. I had drafted my response 4 times and not sent it. Not from doubt about the decision was clear, but from a habit I had developed over 3 years of not announcing things before they were complete. The representation agreement was not signed. Nothing was finished yet. The birthday party was on a Saturday. I drove there with a card for my mother, who was turning 62, and a bottle of wine I had chosen carefully, and the unsigned agreement still sitting in a draft folder in my email. My brother said what he said across the table.
My mother said what she said in the hallway.
My father stared at the ceiling. I cleared my own cake plate and drove home and signed the representation agreement that night, sitting at my kitchen table with the small lamp on at 11:47 in the evening, and sent it to Carolyn Marsh. The submission process took 8 months. I want to tell you this plainly because I think the 8 months are as important as anything else in the story, and they are the part that does not appear in any version of this story that is told from the outside. Carolyn submitted the manuscript to 14 editors at 12 publishing houses. She briefed me before each submission wave, which editors she was approaching, what she knew about their lists, what she thought the specific argument for this book would be with each of them. She was methodical in a way that I recognized and respected. She did not promise timelines because she had been in the business long enough to know that timelines in trade publishing are suggestions made by people who cannot control the actual variables. She said responses typically came in weeks to months, and that silence was not a signal of rejection, only of an overloaded inbox. I continued working at the library. I began a second project, not a novel, a series of linked essays about archival practice and what gets excluded from the institutional record, which I had been turning over in the background of the novel for 2 years, and which now had room to move forward. I taught the archival research seminar in the spring. I did not tell my family that the manuscript was on submission. I had not told them about Carolyn. I had not told them anything since the birthday party, and the birthday party was not a conversation I had revisited with any of them. The 8th month was March. A Tuesday in March, 9:15 in the morning. I was at my desk at the library, working through a catalog backlog, when my phone showed Carolyn's number. She said, "We have an offer." The editor was a woman named Theodora Vance at a mid-sized independent press with a strong literary fiction list and a specific reputation for debut work that required patience to find its audience. The offer was for world English rights, a 2-book deal contingent on my second manuscript meeting editorial approval, and an advance of $83,000 against royalties, structured in 4 payments across the publication timeline. Carolyn had negotiated the 2-book structure specifically because she believed the essay collection I had described would be the right second book for the press's list, and because a 2-book deal gave me contractual runway that a single-book offer would not. I was at my desk at the library. I said, "Thank you, Carolyn." She said, "Don't thank me yet. We have some contract points to work through."
But yes.
Congratulations. I said I would talk to her that afternoon. I ended the call. I sat at my desk for 4 minutes, maybe 5. Then I went back to the catalog backlog. I told no one for 3 days. I told Carolyn's assistant, who needed information from me for the contract process. I told no one else. On the 4th day, I called my closest friend, a woman named Adiz Nulu, who had been asking me careful, non-pressuring questions about the manuscript for 3 years and who, when I told her, was quiet for long enough that I said, "Adiz," and she said, "I'm here." I'm just yes. I knew. I always knew. I told her not to tell anyone yet. She said she wouldn't. The contract was finalized 6 weeks after the offer call, with the assistance of a publishing attorney named Marcus Webb, who specialized in literary contracts and whom Carolyn had recommended. The advance cleared in the first payment installment 2 months after that. I did not call my parents. I continued working at the library. The book published 18 months after the offer. It published in September, which is a good month for literary fiction. The review cycle is active, the award season is beginning. The reading public that cares about debut literary novels is paying attention. Theodora Vance and her team had worked on the manuscript through 2 rounds of editorial revision, a copy edit, a proofread, and a cover design process in which I had more input than I had expected, and less than I would have liked, which I understood to be standard. The cover was good. I did not love it. I also understood that my opinion of the cover was not the most important variable. Carolyn had arranged a small number of pre-publication reviews, and the early responses had been the kind that are useful without being conclusive, accomplished, quietly devastating, a debut that trusts its reader, which is a phrase that means something specific to people who read literary fiction and nothing in particular to anyone else. The kind of reviews, in other words, that confirm the book exists and is good without telling you anything about what will happen next. I had told my parents about the book 3 months before publication. I had sent each of them a brief email, not a conversation, an email, because the email gave them time to respond at whatever pace the information required. I had described the press, the publication date, the cover. My mother had called 2 days later and said she was glad I had found a publisher and that she hoped it went well. My father had responded to the email with 3 sentences. "This is significant news. I am glad you persisted. We will buy a copy." My brother had not responded. The National Literary Debut Prize is awarded annually in January for fiction published in the preceding year. It is administered by a foundation that has been running the award for 31 years, and the shortlist, announced in November, carries enough weight in literary circles to affect print runs, foreign rights negotiations, and the specific attention of reviewers who had not covered the book on its initial publication. I did not know I was under consideration. Authors are not notified of longlist consideration, only of shortlist placement, and my name appeared on the shortlist in November in a press release I did not see until Carolyn forwarded it to me with a single line. "You're on the shortlist. I'm proud of you." I read the email at the library at my desk on a Tuesday morning in November, 2 years and 9 months after the birthday party. I forwarded it to Adiz. I did not forward it to my family. The award announcement was in January. The foundation notified the winner by phone before the public announcement, which went out simultaneously to literary media and the foundation's press list. Carolyn had told me the notification call came between 9 and 11 in the morning on the announcement date. I had taken the day off from the library. I was at my kitchen table with a small lamp on, the same lamp, the same table, the same chair I had been sitting in since February of my 27th year, when my phone rang at 9:43. The foundation's executive director, a man named Oliver Price, confirmed that the novel had won the National Literary Debut Prize. He described the judge's citation. I will not reproduce it here because the words belong to the judges and not to me, but the citation was specific about what the novel did and what it meant, and I sat very still while he read it. He told me the public announcement would go out at 10 o'clock. He congratulated me. I thanked him. I ended the call. I sat at the kitchen table. The lamp was on. The announcement was going out in 17 minutes. I thought about February of my 27th year, the 5:30 mornings, the overhead light versus the lamp, the 14 months of first draft and 9 months of revision, the 11 queries on a Thursday morning. I thought about the birthday party, the hallway, the cake plate, my brother's voice across the table. I did not call my family. I called Adiz, who answered on the first ring and said nothing for a long moment and then said, "Okay, yes." I called Carolyn, who said, "I knew," in the same tone Adiz had used, and then immediately began talking about what needed to happen next, which was why I had called her. I made a cup of tea. At 10 o'clock, I opened my laptop and watched the announcement propagate across literary social media in the specific way that a small world processes significant news, quickly and with a warmth that I found, in that moment, genuinely unexpected. My brother texted at 10:22. The text said, "Just saw the news. That's incredible. Can I get 2 signed copies? One for me and one for Mom." I put my phone face down on the kitchen table. I finished my tea. I picked my phone back up and I wrote, "I'll set aside 2 copies." I sent it. Then I opened my laptop and started drafting the acknowledgments for the paperback edition, which Theodora Vance had told me I would need to submit by the end of the month. My mother called that afternoon. She had, as far as I could tell, been reading about the award on her phone for approximately 2 hours before she called, because she had specific questions about the prize history, about the foundation, about what the citation meant, about whether this changed what would happen with the book's sales. She asked them in a steady sequence, the way she processed new clinical information at work, not performing engagement but actually trying to build an accurate picture. I answered each question directly. At the end of the call, she said, "I didn't understand what you were building." I said, "I know." She said, "I should have been more patient." I said, "You are working from what you could see." She said, "That's generous." I said, "It's accurate." We talked for another 20 minutes about other things. The call ended the way calls between my mother and me usually ended, with a plan to talk again soon, which we would do, which was its own form of continuity. My father sent an email that evening. 4 sentences. The 4th sentence was, "I read the judge's citation 3 times, and I believe I now understand what you have been building." My brother and I have not had a direct conversation about the birthday party. I do not expect that we will. Desmond processes by updating his internal model and moving forward, not by revisiting the prior version. I understand this. The signed copies are in a bag by my door. I will bring them to the next family gathering, which is in 3 weeks, and I will hand them over without ceremony, because ceremony would require both of us to acknowledge something that he is not built to acknowledge, and that I no longer need acknowledged. The library is where I still work, 3 days a week. The terms of the book deal gave me the contractual obligation of a second manuscript and the advance payment that made a reduced schedule possible. The essay collection is 3/4 complete. Theodora Vance has read 2 sections and described them as exactly what I hoped the second book would be, which is a sentence I have returned to on the mornings when the work is hard. The novel is in its 2nd printing. Foreign rights have sold in 4 territories, handled by a rights agent at Carolyn's agency named Petra Solano, who has the specific calm of someone who has done this many times and knows which things matter and which things only feel like they do. The prize has done what prizes do. Open doors that were previously closed, produced a category of attention that is difficult to generate through any other mechanism, and changed the conversation I have to have with the people I am meeting for the first time in professional contexts. I am 30 years old. The book exists. The second book is coming. My grandmother, who turned the water glass at the birthday party and said nothing, called me 2 weeks after the award. She is 79 years old, and she called from the landline she has had since 1987, and she said, in the specific direct way she has always spoken to me since I was small, "I always thought it would be you. I just didn't know when." I said, "Why didn't you say so?" She said, "Because you didn't need me to." She was right. I told her she was right. She said, "I know." And she laughed, the way she has always laughed, with her whole chest, like the room owes her the space for it. There is a thing I want to say about the people who called the work embarrassing, and I want to say it without settling any scores, because there are no scores to settle. The work is not a score. It was never a score. My brother said embarrassing and meant it as information. My mother said, normal people don't do this, and meant it as protection. My father stared at the ceiling because he did not have language for a risk he could not quantify, and the ceiling was the thing he could look at while he waited for the language to arrive. None of them were wrong about the risk. They were simply looking at the risk without access to the specific information that would have changed their calculation. The manuscript, the mornings, the lamp, the 14 months of first draft, the quality of the work itself. The work was always the answer to the question they were asking. They just couldn't read it yet. What I have learned, not from the award but from the years before it, is that the people who need proof before they can believe are not the right audience for the work while you are making it. They are the audience for the finished thing. You make the thing for the people who will receive it, not for the people who are watching you work. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the people watching you work eventually become the people who receive it. Sometimes they update. Sometimes they send you a text asking for 2 signed copies. Sometimes they call from a 1987 landline and say they always knew it would be you. You cannot write toward that outcome. You can only write toward the work. Before I go, I want to ask you something that I have been thinking about since the Tuesday morning in January when the phone rang at 9:43. There was a moment in this story when I put my phone face down on the kitchen table after reading my brother's text. Not out of anger. The anger, if it ever fully was anger, had been composted into something else a long time before that morning. Out of something more like the need to let the moment be what it was before I responded to it. If you have had that moment, if you have ever received a message from someone who once told you that your dream was embarrassing, asking you now for a piece of what you built, I want to know what you did with it. Not what you said back. What you did, in the quiet before you said anything. What was in that pause? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. If this story found you at the right time, subscribe so you're there for the next one. New stories go up every week. And if you know someone in the years before the award, Still in the 5:30 mornings, still with the lamp on, and no one watching, share this with them. I'll see you in the next one. This is an original fictional story created for entertainment purposes only. All names, characters, events, and details are invented. Any resemblance to real persons or actual events is entirely coincidental.